The great hall of the Galactic Council hummed with tension. Massive screens displayed a dying star system, its central star pulsing an angry red. Emergency alerts flashed across every display, showing the desperate situation of Colony Beta 7, trapped in the dying system's third planet. Council leader Mark stood at the center platform, his gray uniform marking him as one of the senior members. His weathered face showed concern as he addressed the gathered representatives of over 30 spacefaring species. "The situation is critical," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Colony Beta 7 reports their shields will fail within 20 standard days. They need immediate evacuation." The warrior race representatives, tall and proud in their battle armor, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their reputation for bravery was legendary, yet none stepped forward. "The radiation levels are beyond safe limits," growled Tom, the champion of the mighty bear warriors. "Our fastest ships would be crippled before reaching the colony. Our calculations show an 82% chance of total mission failure," added Bill, the leader of the Eagle Empire, his metallic wings catching the light. No crew could survive those conditions. One by one, the greatest spacefaring races declined. Some cited technical limitations, others spoke of impossible odds. Each refusal deepened the silence in the hall. Then a simple hand raised from the back. All eyes turned to see Robert, the human representative, standing up. His plain blue uniform looked almost shabby compared to the ornate attire of other species. "Earth will accept this mission," he said firmly. Laughter erupted from several sections of the hall. The bear warriors actually slapped their armrests in amusement. "The cowardly humans." Tom's voice boomed with mockery. "You who triple-check every airlock, who demand 17 different safety protocols just to start an engine." Robert remained standing, unfazed by the ridicule. "Yes, we who check our airlocks. We who plan for emergencies. We who prepare for the worst. Your species is known for running from fights," Bill scoffed. "You avoid war whenever possible. What makes you think you can handle this?" "Because," Robert replied calmly, "what you call cowardice, we call preparation. What you mock as weakness, we know as wisdom. Our ship, the Prudence, is already equipped for such conditions." The laughter died down as Robert activated his own display. Technical specifications scrolled across the screens, showing a vessel unlike any in the Council's records. Triple-layered radiation shields, redundant life support systems, multiple backup plans for every critical system. "We designed this ship precisely for situations others call impossible," Robert explained. "While others built weapons, we built safety systems. While others trained for battle, we trained for survival." Council leader Mark studied the specifications with growing interest. "Your ship could theoretically withstand the radiation, but the crew will be safer than any other," Robert finished, "because we planned for everything that could go wrong. We respect danger enough to prepare for it." The hall fell silent again, but this time with thoughtful consideration rather than mockery. "The humans accept this mission," Robert stated formally. "We will depart within 6 hours, following our standard safety protocols." As he turned to leave, Tom called out, "You'll need warriors for this." Robert paused at the door. "No," he said quietly. "We need people who understand that true courage isn't about ignoring danger. It's about facing it with proper preparation." The human delegation left the chamber, already beginning their pre-mission checklists. Behind them, the mighty warrior races watched in confusion, struggling to understand how their cowardly humans dared to attempt what they would not. Council leader Mark watched them go, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Perhaps, he thought, it was time for the galaxy to reconsider what true courage meant. In the docking bay, the Prudence's crew was already running through their safety procedures. They knew the dangers ahead. They understood the risks. But they also knew that every check, every backup plan, every safety measure increased their chances of success. The same caution that made others mock them would be their greatest strength in the mission ahead. As Captain James of the Prudence liked to say, Fortune favors the prepared. The rescue mission to save Colony Beta 7 was about to begin, and humanity's cowardice would be put to the ultimate test. Captain James stood in the Prudence's briefing room, facing his crew of 20. The ship's holograms displayed detailed maps of the dying star system, while warning indicators flashed along the edges of each screen. "This isn't a standard rescue," he began, his voice steady and clear. "We're heading into conditions that would destroy most ships. That's why we'll do this by the book. Our book." The crew sat attentively, datapads ready. Unlike the warrior races who prized dramatic speeches before missions, humans preferred detailed planning sessions. "Engineering team," James called out. "Report on shield modifications." Chief Engineer Pete stepped forward, his work uniform already showing grease stains from the preparations. "We've installed the experimental triple-layer shielding. Each layer operates independently. If one fails, we have 2 backups. We've also added radiation-absorbing panels to the hull." From the observation deck above, several alien observers watched with poorly hidden disdain. They had been sent by their governments to learn from the humans, though their real purpose was clearly to witness the expected failure. "Such waste of time," muttered one observer to another. "Warriors should already be launching." Down in the briefing room, the planning continued. Lieutenant Ann, head of medical, outlined her preparations. "We've stocked radiation treatment supplies for twice our crew numbers. Each crew member has been fitted with personal radiation monitors. We've also prepared the cargo bay as an emergency treatment center for the colonists." The alien observers shook their heads at such excessive precautions. "Navigation," James continued, turning to his pilot. "Mike, show us the approach route." Mike activated a detailed 3D map. "We've plotted 17 different approach vectors. Each has been calculated against predicted solar flare patterns. We'll use Route 7 as our primary, with Routes 3 and 12 as backups." 17 routes. One alien observer scoffed. "A brave captain needs only one." The humans continued their briefing, undisturbed by the commentary above. They moved through emergency procedures, backup plans, and evacuation protocols. Every crew member knew their primary role, and at least 2 backup positions. "Communications," James addressed his comm officer. "What's our redundancy status?" 3 separate systems ready," reported Tim. "Standard, quantum, and the new tachyon array. We've also got short-range emergency beacons for every crew member and enough for the colonists." The preparation continued for hours. Equipment was checked, then checked again. Emergency drills were run, with timing measured and improved. The alien observers grew increasingly restless. How can they expect to succeed when they waste so much time on safety? One wondered aloud. Below, James was concluding the briefing. "Remember, we're not here to be heroes. We're here to get those colonists out alive. Every safety check we perform increases their chances of survival." As the crew dispersed to their final preparations, Chief Engineer Pete approached the captain with a concerned look. "The alien observers are making the crew nervous," he said quietly. "They keep talking about how real warriors would have launched hours ago." James smiled slightly. "Let them talk. They're used to species that charge into danger. They don't understand that our greatest strength is refusing to take unnecessary risks." The final hours before launch were spent testing every system. The aliens watched in growing frustration as humans methodically worked through their checklists. Finally, after what the observers considered an eternity of preparation, Captain James gave the order to begin launch procedures. "Starting pre-launch sequence," announced Mike from the pilot's seat. "Time to completion, 45 minutes." The aliens nearly exploded with disbelief. 45 minutes just to launch. But the humans carried on with their methodical process. Every system was brought online in careful sequence. Every reading was verified. Every safety parameter was confirmed. As the Prudence finally lifted off, one of the alien observers grudgingly admitted, "At least now we'll see if all this preparation was worth anything." Little did they know that every minute spent in preparation, every safety check performed, and every backup plan created would soon prove vital to the mission's success. The Prudence rose smoothly into space, carrying its cowardly human crew toward what others had deemed impossible. They were as ready as anyone could be for the challenges ahead. The Prudence entered the outer edges of the dying star system, its enhanced sensors already detecting the dangerous radiation levels. On the bridge, Captain James watched as the angry red giant filled the main view screen, its surface churning with massive solar flares. "Shields at maximum," reported Pete from his engineering station. All 3 layers functioning at optimal levels. He monitored his displays carefully, watching for any sign of weakness in their defenses. The ship moved forward cautiously, following Navigation Route 7. Mike's hands moved steadily over his controls, making minute adjustments to their course. "First radiation wave approaching," he announced. "Impact in 30 seconds. The crew braced themselves. When the wave hit, the ship shuddered slightly, but held firm. "Shield status," James called out. "Outer layer at 92% strength," Pete responded. "Exactly as predicted in simulations. Inner layers untouched." From the ship's data center, Tim monitored communications, receiving automated distress beacons from Colony Beta 7. "Signal strength increasing as we get closer." The Prudence pressed deeper into the system. The temperature outside the hull rose steadily as they approached the dying star. Warning indicators flashed across every screen, but the crew remained focused on their tasks. Solar flare detected. Anne called from her science station, much larger than predicted, coming from coordinates 227 by 84. "Initiating evasive pattern Delta," Mike responded immediately. The ship banked sharply, the maneuver executed precisely as practiced in their simulations. The massive flare passed by them, its edges barely grazing their shields. Where other ships would have been crippled, the Prudence's preparations held firm. "Outer shield down to 67%, Pete reported. "Activating emergency cooling systems." James nodded. They had expected this. "Switch to approach Route 12, he ordered. The star's becoming more unstable than predicted. The ship altered course smoothly. Through the view screen, they could now see their target, the 3rd planet of the system, where Colony Beta 7 struggled to survive. "Radiation levels rising exponentially," Anne warned. "We're approaching the theoretical limits of our shielding." Another solar flare erupted, this one directly in their path. There was no time to evade. "All hands, brace for impact," James commanded. "Engineering, divert emergency power to forward shields." The flare struck them head-on. The ship groaned under the assault. Warning sirens blared throughout the vessel. "Outer shield failing," Pete shouted over the noise. "Second layer holding at 85%, 70%, stabilizing at 63%. Where other ships would have already been destroyed, the Prudence's redundant systems kept them alive. The backup cooling systems strained but succeeded in preventing shield collapse. "Distance to Colony Beta 7, James asked, his voice steady despite the crisis. 15,000 kilometers in closing," Mike responded. "We're closer than any previous rescue attempt." The ship pushed forward through the stellar hell. Their sensors detected the wreckage of previous rescue ships, their remains testament to the foolishness of rushing in unprepared. "Captain," Tim called out suddenly, "I'm picking up live communications from the colony." A voice crackled through the bridge speakers, weak but clear. "Prudence, this is Colony Beta 7. We didn't think anyone would make it this close. Our shields are failing. Please hurry." James leaned forward in his chair. "Colony Beta 7, this is Captain James. Hold on. We're coming." The Prudence continued its careful approach, each movement calculated, each system monitored. Their excessive preparation was paying off with every passing moment. Entering stable orbit, Mike announced finally. Position achieved. On the bridge, the crew allowed themselves a brief moment of satisfaction. They had reached their target, succeeding where braver but less cautious rescuers had failed. "Well done, everyone," James said quietly. "But we're only halfway there. Now comes the hard part." Through the view screen, they could see the colony's domed structures on the planet's surface, surrounded by the shimmering field of failing shields. The real challenge, evacuating hundreds of colonists through this stellar nightmare, was about to begin. Behind them, the dying star raged on, as if angry that its fury had failed to defeat these careful, methodical humans who dared to challenge it. Lieutenant Anne stood in the Prudence's cargo bay, now converted into a massive evacuation center. Medical stations lined the walls, while emergency radiation shelters filled the central space. Every detail had been planned for maximum efficiency. "First shuttle is prepped and ready," Pete reported through the comm. He had personally checked every system on the small craft that would ferry colonists from the surface. "Ground team in position." Tim's voice came next. Colony's main dome secured and ready for evacuation procedures. Above the planet, the Prudence maintained its careful orbit, while the dying star continued its violent display. Each solar flare made the ship's shields flare bright blue, but they held firm. Captain James's voice came through clear on all channels. "Begin Phase 1 evacuation. Priority to children and medical cases." The first shuttle descended toward the colony's surface, piloted by Mike. Its path followed exact coordinates, calculated to minimize radiation exposure. The colony's weakening shields parted briefly to allow entry. Inside the colony's main dome, panic threatened to erupt as hundreds of colonists pressed toward the rescue teams. But the humans had planned for this too. "Everyone, please remain calm." Anne's voice carried through the colony speakers. "We have room for all. Follow the lighted pathways. Medical cases to the red zone, families with children to the blue zone." The human rescue teams moved with practiced precision. Each wore radiation suits with triple-layered protection, their movements careful but efficient. "First group ready for transport," reported Mike from the shuttle. 23 colonists secured. The shuttle rose smoothly from the surface, its passenger compartment shielded even more heavily than the Prudence itself. Inside, frightened colonists found themselves surrounded by reassuring organization and preparation. As the first shuttle docked with the Prudence, Anne's team sprang into action. Each colonist was scanned for radiation exposure, treated if necessary, and guided to their designated shelter. "Second shuttle launching," Pete announced. "All systems green." Below in the colony, the evacuation continued with methodical efficiency. Human rescue workers helped the elderly, carried the sick, and kept careful count of every colonist. "Warning," Tim's voice cut through the routine. "Solar activity increasing. Major flare building on the star's surface." Captain James made an instant decision. "Accelerate evacuation. Mike, reduce safety margins to level 2. Anne, prepare for increased intake." The pace quickened, but never descended into chaos. Every member of the crew had drilled for this scenario. The shuttles began flying faster routes, trading some safety margin for speed, but never approaching reckless levels. "Colony shield stability at 15%, reported Tim. "Estimated failure in 3 hours." The numbers were worse than expected, but the humans didn't panic. They adjusted their plans, recalculated their timetables, and pressed on. In the Prudence's cargo bay, Anne directed her growing medical team. Some colonists showed signs of radiation exposure, but the prepared treatment stations handled each case efficiently. "How many still on the surface?" James asked, watching the star's increasing instability. 142, Tim responded. "Current evacuation rate, 30 per shuttle run." The math was simple and brutal. They needed 5 more runs, but the colony shields might not last that long. "Switching to Emergency Protocol Delta," James announced. "Launch third shuttle." This had been part of their backup plans. Risky, but calculated. 3 shuttles operating simultaneously would strain their resources, but could complete the evacuation in time. The rescue workers below maintained their discipline, even as the dome above them groaned under the failing shields. They had trained for this, prepared for this, and now executed their plans with precision. Shuttle 1, loaded and lifting, Mike reported. Shuttle 2, beginning descent, came Pete's voice. Shuttle 3, ready for docking, added Tim. Through it all, and coordinated the flow of refugees into the Prudence, each person tagged, treated, and safely sheltered. The cargo bay became increasingly crowded, but never chaotic. Above them all, the dying star flared and pulsed, as if sensing its prey was escaping. The Prudence's shields flashed constantly now, but the triple layers held firm. 87 colonists remaining, Tim updated. Colony shields at 8%. The race against time continued, with human preparation and planning battling against the raw fury of a dying star. The outcome would depend not on bravery or strength, but on the careful execution of well-laid plans. The warning came without mercy. Star core collapsing. Anne's voice cut through all channels. Final phase beginning ahead of predictions. On the Prudence's bridge, Captain James watched in horror as the dying star's surface began to ripple with unprecedented activity. Their carefully calculated timetables had just been shattered. 42 colonists still on surface, Tim reported, his voice tight with tension. 2 shuttles en route to colony, 1 returning. The ship's sensors screamed with warnings as radiation levels spiked beyond their charts. The triple-layered shields flared brilliant blue, straining against forces they were never meant to endure. Outer shield failing, Pete shouted from engineering. Diverting emergency power, second layer at 45% and dropping. In the colony below, the final groups of colonists huddled near the shuttle base. The dome above them groaned ominously, its weakened shields flickering like dying light bulbs. Colony shield collapse imminent, Tim announced. 2 minutes maximum. James hit the ship-wide comm. Implement contingency plan Omega. This is not a drill. Repeat. Omega protocol active. The crew responded instantly. During preparation, many had questioned the need for such an extreme backup plan. Now, they were grateful for their captain's excessive caution. Launching emergency shield buoys, Pete reported. The Prudence released dozens of small devices, each carrying a miniature shield generator. They formed a protective corridor between the ship and the colony. Shuttle 1, returning with full load, Mike's voice crackled through static. Radiation levels critical. The shuttle emerged from the colony's failing shields, riding a wave of plasma from the dying star. It threaded through the corridor of shield buoys, each one burning out as it passed, but providing crucial moments of protection. Medical bay overflow activated, Anne reported from below. Converting secondary cargo holds now. The star's surface erupted with unprecedented fury. A massive solar flare, larger than any they'd seen, began to build. Shuttle 2, loaded and launching, came the report from the colony. 25 souls aboard. Final group preparing for Shuttle 3, Tim added. 17 colonists remaining. The colony's shields started to disintegrate. Patches of the protective field winked out, allowing deadly radiation to pierce through. The human rescue teams, protected by their redundant safety gear, never stopped working. Outer shield gone. Pete's voice was strained. Second layer critical. Third layer engaged. The Prudence shuddered as another wave of stellar energy washed over it. Systems began to fail across the ship, but backup after backup kicked in, just as planned. Shuttle 2 has docked, Mike reported, beginning emergency unloading procedures. Down in the colony, the final shuttle's pilot started emergency launch procedures while the last colonists rushed aboard. The dome above them was now more holes than shield. Colony structure failing, Tim warned. Complete collapse in 30 seconds. The final shuttle lifted off just as the colony's main support beams began to buckle. It shot upward through the dissolving shield, its own protective systems straining against the onslaught. Massive flare incoming. Anne's voice carried pure dread. Energy readings off the scale. Emergency thrust. James commanded. All power to shields. The Prudence's engines roared to life, pushing the ship to its designed limits and beyond. The final shuttle, carrying the last 17 colonists, desperately raced for the docking bay. 10 seconds to flare impact, Tim counted down. Shuttle almost docked. 5 seconds. 3. The docking clamps locked just as the flare struck. The Prudence's shields blazed like a newborn sun as the ship fought against forces that would have vaporized less prepared vessels. All colonists secured, Anne reported, her voice heavy with relief. Beginning emergency radiation treatments. Below them, the colony disappeared in a flash of light as the star began its final death throes. But inside the Prudence, hundreds of rescued colonists huddled safely in their shelters, protected by layer upon layer of human preparation and planning. "Get us out of here," James ordered quietly. "Best speed to safe distance." The Prudence turned away from the dying star, its engines straining but stable, its backup systems holding firm. They had succeeded not through bravery alone, but through the perfect execution of carefully laid plans. The real test, however, was still to come. They still had to outrace a supernova. The Prudence raced through space, pushing its engines beyond their rated capacity. Behind them, the dying star had begun its final collapse, its core compressing into what would soon become a catastrophic explosion. "Time to supernova," Captain James demanded, his hands gripping his chair as the ship shuddered. 4 minutes, 17 seconds, Anne replied, her eyes fixed on the sensor readings. "Blast wave will exceed our maximum sustainable speed." In engineering, Pete worked frantically at his controls. Main engine temperature critical. Switching to backup cooling systems. The ship's corridors were packed with rescued colonists, each secured in emergency acceleration couches that had seemed excessive during planning. Now, these safety measures were proving vital. "Hull integrity at 72%, Tim reported. "Multiple microfractures detected in outer plating." James activated the ship-wide comm. "All hands, prepare for emergency acceleration. This is what we trained for." The Prudence's engines screamed as they pushed the ship harder. Behind them, the star's death throes lit up space with terrifying brightness. 3 minutes to detonation, Anne called out. Radiation levels still climbing. In the medical bay, the rescued colonists watched in terror as the ship's viewport showed the approaching doom. But the human medical team continued their work calmly, administering radiation treatments and securing safety harnesses. "Activating emergency thrust boosters," Mike announced from the pilot's seat. His hands flew over the controls, executing maneuvers they had practiced countless times in simulation. The ship lurched forward as hidden engines, installed specifically for this scenario, roared to life. The acceleration pressed everyone into their seats with crushing force. 2 minutes. Anne's voice was strained against the G-forces, star core temperature reaching critical mass. Pete's voice crackled through the comm. "Primary engine cooling system failure. Switching to tertiary backup." Where other ships would have been dead in space, the Prudence's redundant systems kept them moving. Every backup, every failsafe, every unnecessary precaution was now keeping them alive. "Structural integrity dropping," Tim warned. "Outer hull plates beginning to buckle." James hit a series of commands on his chair. "Engaging emergency hull reinforcement. Divert power from non-essential systems." The ship groaned as automatic systems tightened thousands of support struts throughout its frame. Another excessive feature that was now proving its worth. 1 minute to detonation. Anne shouted, "Blast wave forming." Mike's hands never stopped moving across his controls, plotting emergency jump trajectory. Standard routes won't clear the blast radius. The star behind them had compressed to a tiny point of unimaginable density. The sensors could barely process the readings they were receiving. 30 seconds. Anne's voice was nearly drowned out by the ship's training systems. "Prepare for initial shockwave." The first wave hit them like a hammer. The Prudence buckled but held together, its reinforced structure absorbing forces that would have torn other ships apart. Multiple system failures, Pete reported, switching to emergency backups across all decks. 10 seconds. Anne called out, "Brace for primary detonation." James's voice cut through the chaos. "Activate final protection protocols. All hands. Emergency positions." The star exploded. For a moment, the entire universe seemed to go white. The Prudence was caught in a wave of pure energy, its every system strained to breaking point. "Hull breach on Deck 3. Tim shouted. "Emergency containment holding." The ship tumbled through space, its engines howling as Mike fought for control. Every safety system, every backup, every redundancy was engaged in keeping them alive. Secondary shock wave approaching. Anne warned. "Impact in 5, 4, 3. The blast caught them again, but this time they were ready. The Prudence's systems, designed and tested for exactly this scenario, absorbed the impact. "We're clear," Mike announced finally. Achieving stable trajectory. The bridge crew sagged in relief as the sensors confirmed they had outrun the worst of the explosion. Behind them, where a star had once burned, a new nebula was being born from its remains. "Damage report," James ordered, his voice steady despite everything. "Multiple systems damaged but contained," Pete responded. "Every backup performed as designed. We're battered, but we'll make it." The Prudence limped away from the destruction, carrying its precious cargo of rescued colonists. They had survived not through luck or bravery alone, but through careful planning and redundant safety systems. The cowardly humans had succeeded where braver races had feared to try. The Prudence limped into the Galactic Council's main docking bay, its hull scared but intact. Through the viewport, the crew could see a massive crowd gathered to witness their return. No one had expected to see the ship again. Captain James stood at the main airlock, waiting for the decontamination cycle to complete. Behind him, hundreds of rescued colonists prepared to disembark, each one a testament to human preparation and planning. The airlock cycled open. Council leader Mark stood waiting, flanked by representatives of the warrior races. Their expressions ranged from disbelief to grudging respect. "Welcome back, Captain," Mark said formally. "We did not expect this outcome." The bear warrior Tom stepped forward, his massive frame tense with confusion. "How did you survive?" "Our best calculations showed the mission was impossible." James gestured to his crew, who were helping colonists disembark. "We survived because we respected the danger enough to prepare for it. Every backup system, every safety protocol, every redundant measure kept us alive." Lieutenant Anne emerged from the ship, carrying medical records. All colonists accounted for, 347 souls rescued, all expected to make full recoveries. The Eagle Empire's bill spread his metallic wings in agitation. But the star, the radiation levels alone should have killed us. Engineer Pete interrupted, emerging from the ship covered in engine grease. "That's why we had triple-layered shields. That's why we had backup systems for our backup systems." The gathered council members watched in amazement as the colonists continued to disembark. Each one had been treated, documented, and cared for according to detailed protocols. One of the colonists, an elderly leader, approached the council. "You called these humans cowards," he said firmly. "But their cowardice saved us all. While your mighty warriors talked of impossible odds, they planned, prepared, and succeeded." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we were hasty in our judgment." "Perhaps," James replied quietly. "It's time to reconsider what courage really means. Is it braver to rush into danger unprepared, or to face it with careful planning?" The council chamber had fallen silent as more ships arrived, carrying representatives from worlds across the galaxy. News of the successful rescue had spread quickly. Council leader Mark stepped forward. "Captain James, your mission has taught us all a valuable lesson. The Council formally recognizes that courage wears many faces. And some of those faces wear safety gear, Pete added with a grin, holding up his heavily shielded toolkit. The warrior races, long respected for their bravery, found themselves looking at the human crew with new eyes. The careful preparations they had mocked now seemed like a different kind of courage, one that valued life enough to protect it. "We would like," Bill announced formally, "to learn more about your safety protocols and backup systems." James smiled. "We'll be happy to share our knowledge. After all, proper preparation means everyone has a better chance of survival." The Prudence's crew began organizing training sessions, teaching other species about the value of redundant systems and careful planning. What had once been mocked as cowardice was now recognized as wisdom. In the following months, ships across the galaxy began incorporating human safety measures. Rescue missions that once would have been deemed impossible were now attempted with careful preparation and multiple backup plans. The term human-grade safety became a mark of quality rather than an insult. The warrior races learned that there was no shame in planning for failure, and that true courage included protecting others through preparation. As James watched these changes from the Prudence's bridge, preparing for their next mission, he reflected on how their cowardly approach had changed the galaxy's understanding of bravery. "Ready for pre-launch safety checks, Captain?" Pete asked from his station. "Always," James replied with a smile. After all, fortune favors the prepared. The Prudence's legacy lived on, not just in the lives it had saved, but in the lesson it had taught the galaxy, that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in facing danger unprepared, but in taking the time to respect it enough to prepare properly. The cowardly humans had shown the galaxy a new way to be brave, one careful step at a time.